Welcome to Aware. We are dedicated to communicating information that inspires your positive growth and change. Are you interested in a peaceful planet? Are you interested in optimal health? Are you living with purpose? Are you enjoying your life? We realize each person can make a difference, and our mission is to empower your awareness. The choices that you make in every moment shape your life, and we encourage you to realize that you have your own answers and to always listen to your own truth. We invite you to stay aware. Hi, I'm Lisa Garr, and welcome to the Aware Health series, where I speak with experts that help us look at what life looks like in our new normal. How do we not only adapt to change, but embrace change? And also, what does our mindset look like in this entire time of a pandemic sensitive world? We're talking about solution oriented techniques, and they are much easier to embrace when you connect with like minded people, as we are doing here today on this show. We get to learn together, we get to choose specifically where we put our thoughts together, and we also get to look at collectively what is possible. And that happens no matter what time you watch this show. That happens because we connect, and we really are connecting all of the time. So, what does that new normal look like? Are you, by any chance, choosing food as comfort during these very uncertain times? Well, if so, you're not alone at all. We are kind of all off of our normal routines, and finding comfort in sugar and carbohydrates, it can be a bad habit or a hard habit to break if you start. It is maybe time to reset our relationship with food. Maybe we can look at this time to really reset that entire relationship. And fun fact, willpower is not your friend right now. It will actually leave you. So do not make friends with it, because in the morning you might feel great and strong and you're going to eat great. And by the end of the day, after you've watched 14 hours of CNN, you are not feeling great and you're going right for the carbs. And this is an education that we are talking about today. That is how you maintain your strength, is through food education. And you can reset your relationship with food because you have something to fall back on. And you can then achieve true freedom from food, or food freedom. They're two different things. And I'm very excited. Joining me is Eric Edmeades. He is the creator of Wild Fit, and he does just that. He's not only a food educator, he's a mindset educator. And that is the most important thing that gives us true freedom when it comes to food. Welcome, Eric. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey,
I
thanks
love
so
it.
much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, yes. So, wow, you've had such a huge life. I mean, you've done so much in your life, but specifically your passion around food. Where does that come
It comes from health recovery. I was very often sick as a child, with things that we would consider to be chronic. I had chronic throat infections, chronic sinus infections, ear infections, chronic acne, digestive problems, and so forth. And, one of the things I've learned about kids is that when they get sick like that, they stop thinking of it as sick and they just start taking it on as a self-identity. And that's really what had happened to me. My doctors, my family insisted that I went to see doctors and stuff, but I was like, well, nothing's helped so far. This just must be who I am. And then
from?
at one point, some friends of mine sat me down and said, look, let's have a conversation about food, which I thought was ridiculous because I eat fairly well. I mean, I think I'm doing okay. And then we had this conversation about food, and I decided to experiment a little bit. And so for about a month, for 30 days, I cut out a few things, added in a few other things, and miraculously, and it felt like a miracle. 30 days later, I was 35 pounds lighter. All of my acne had cleared up, all my throat infections, all my allergies, all my digestive problems. I was an entirely new human being. And that
Wow.
stimulated a really powerful curiosity in me, a really strong curiosity as to how it was possible that I could visit doctors, specialists, and medical experts for almost a decade and get no results, and experiment with food for 30 days and change everything.
That completely can change your life. What were you eating? Or was it not that bad? You just didn't know you were allergic?
No, it was, I was a standard American diet person. I ate fast food occasionally. I had, refined flour and sugar and rice and things like that occasionally. I had dairy products in my diet. Of course, it was routine for me to eat sugar. Not like I wasn't like binging out on candies or anything, but sugar is so in everything. And I just didn't understand that at the time, that I was basically being fed. Look, here's the bottom line, in my opinion. If you are being fed by humans, you're in trouble. Animals in nature seem to be doing pretty much okay, except for us destroying their nature. But when they're living their natural life, they're doing okay. Our pets, our zoo animals, and us, all fed by humans, they're in trouble. And that's really what I recognize is, and by the way, I want you to know, none of what I said is intended as any disrespect to our doctors and medical professionals. It's really maybe a disrespect that's directed at their education model, because I've now been asking doctors for over 20 years, in their entire education to become a doctor, how much of that time do they spend studying food? And the answer, of course, is none, unless they took an elective. It's not required. And I think that's almost where step one is if we have a medical system that has doctors that are not at all required to even think about food other than eating, then that's a problem, in my opinion. And that's one of the reasons that my doctors were not helpful in my situation, because my issues were food related. What doctors are incredibly good at is you have a pathogen that's attacked you. You have an injury, you've been burnt. I was lit on fire once when I was 18 years old. Thank God there were doctors that could rebuild my arm for me. So I'm not down on doctors. I'm just saying doctors aren't here for preventative healthcare. They're here for reactionary healthcare.
Well, you learned a lot actually when you went out and you studied with the elephants. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what that taught.
You know, one moment is, one of the things I think about is that our current education system often sort of takes the creativity of children and turns it into this like very convergent knowledge. Like an average child, if you show them a paperclip and ask them what it is, they'll tell you it's a million different things. It could be a spaceship, it could be a little person. And if you ask an adult, it's a paperclip. And I was very lucky that I was encouraged a lot more in my family life to have a wider set of curiosities. So, for example, I was massively curious about food after this turnaround in my life. I was also tremendously curious about human evolution and anthropology, because my grandfather had discovered the oldest Homo sapien skull. And so I was always fascinated by that stuff. And then I also,
Wow.
totally separately, because I worked in sales and I worked in marketing, was really fascinated by behavioral change and what stimulated people to take action. And in my case, the moment of truth came when I had this pervasive question is like, what is going on with food with humans? And you're right, elephants were the thing that sort of set it off. I was originally born in South Africa. I do a lot of wildlife photography. I spend a huge amount of time in the bush in Africa. And I was flying down to South Africa to do a photo assignment for Virgin Atlantic Airways. And as I got on the plane, there was an article in the magazine, and it talked about how when zoos first put elephants in them, the elephants would only live 7 or 8, 10 years, something like that. And
Mm,
that they didn't think that was a problem, because nobody knew how long, this is 1885. They didn't know how long elephants were supposed to live. So if they got 7 years out and they made their money back, it was a good deal. But when they started
wow.
finding out that elephants could live 70 years, they started thinking, wow, we could get a lot more return on our investment. So they started comparing elephants in the wild versus elephant in captivity. And in the article, I remember reading it on the plane, I was irritated by the grammar, because the writer kept on talking about their captive diet compared with their wild diet. And that's grammatically incorrect. It's not their wild diet, it's their diet. It's the elephant diet. And it suddenly
That's
dawned on
right.
me that every living organism in the world has a diet, but we go on diets. We use the word incorrectly. If you're watching a nature program and they go, well, the cheetah has a diet. They don't say the cheetah went on a diet. The cheetah has a diet of eating 2.5 kilograms of fresh meat every day that it can, and that's its diet. And that was a big awakening for me, because suddenly I was like, wait a second. Every organism on earth has a naturally evolved diet, which is a combination of its food production capacity and its nutritional requirements. And if you take it off that diet, it gets sick. And why would be any different for us?
Mm, that's true. You have a phrase, I think, on your website that says diets don't fail people. Is that what you've said for a
No, no,
long
no, you're
time?
so close. It's so close. Is that the food industry and the diet industry are predicated upon blaming you. The
Yes.
name lifestyle disease, the lifestyle disease. Oh my God, that's a manipulative and disgusting title. Lifestyle disease is a way of the food industry and the governments that have been bought and lobbied and paid for to blame you for what they did to you with food. So now if we call it a lifestyle disease, well, you made lifestyle decisions. No, it's a food production disease. And so our expression is that the diet industry is no different. The diet industry is set up to damage your self-esteem. And then the lower your self-esteem, the more garbage you'll eat and the more diets you'll have to go on. And so our expression is, if you've ever felt like you failed at a diet, the truth is people don't fail diets. Diets fail people.
That's right.
And that's what we have to do is really support people in changing their psychology, because giving them a bunch of rules they're just going to violate hurts their self-esteem and makes them eat stuff.
So people don't fail diets, the plan that's supposed to be out there for us. Diets fail people because of the food supply that we're eating is completely contaminated. It isn't recognized by the body, all of that.
And because diets are predicated on a bunch of myths that are completely rubbish. Counting calories is completely nonsensical. The idea that you can outrun your diet, that you could exercise it away was a notion invented by the soft drink industry to shift the blame. It's part of the lifestyle disease frame. So the diet industry has been predicated on a bunch of really terrible food science, and so they don't work. You come along and you make people use willpower. Well, willpower is consciousness and your body is subconscious. And so what that means is that if you right now want to hold your breath, you can use willpower to hold your breath for upwards of maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes, but then your body is going to take over and it's going to go, we're breathing now. And so the same thing happens if you use willpower to not eat what your body really wants to eat. Eventually your body's going to go, nope, we're eating. It's not your choice anymore.
Totally.
And so then you failed at a diet. You're failed at a diet. Your self-esteem takes a hit. Now you want to eat more junk.
Yep. It's a self-sabotage behavior. And that's why I said it's not your friend. Has anyone ever tried this where they wake up in the morning, you're gung-ho and you exercise and you eat right, and about 4 o'clock after 57,000 things have gone wrong, you want to eat the kitchen? And that's exactly. So, and this is happening a lot right now. We see memes of people that are gaining weight while they're sheltering at home. And this is okay, that this is to be expected because the gyms are closed and the outdoors have been shut down. Now, what can we do to regain our own self-control during this time where we know that we actually have a choice? We do.
All right. So there's some cool food psychology stuff that we can talk about there, but it actually starts with leverage. It starts with how badly you want it. So let me give you 2 very good reasons that everybody should keep an eye on this. The first thing is, I'm going to say something a little controversial and unpopular, but I'm going to suggest to you that COVID-19 is not a super sleuthy, super strong bug. It's a wimpy bug that only works in a population devastated by a terrible food industry. We are now seeing quite clearly that the vast majority of people that are facing serious hospitalization, dying from this COVID-19, are actually dying from other complications: diabetes, obesity, hypertension, autoimmune disease, most of which is being triggered by the food production system that we live in. And so here's an interesting question, an interesting thought exercise. What do you think would happen if COVID-19 had actually escaped from wherever it escaped from, whatever theory you believe, in the 1960s? Nothing. It would have been like a bad flu because there wasn't enough diabetes. There wasn't, as Mark Hyman would call it, diabetes. There wasn't enough diabetes, obesity, hypertension to cause a problem. So if you really want to talk about herd immunity with a virus like this, the best way to create herd immunity with a virus like this is for everybody to be healthy. Then the virus can't go anywhere. So that's thing number one. You do not want, this is not the time to be, sucking back chocolate and Coca-Cola and ding dongs and all that stuff. When you want to be as healthy as possible so that you are ready to handle the virus should it make its way into your life. And then the second thing that's just as important is that there's pretty good science out there that says that anything you do every single day for between 15 and 21 days is likely to become a habit. And it's going to do that for a number of reasons. One is you're going to develop addictions to your own internal biochemistry that matches that behavior. Plus, after 15 to 21 days, you've created new neural pathways in your brain that are so easy to have that they'll just keep on happening as a behavior pattern. And then on top of that, most of the foods we're talking about here have addictive substances in them. So if you want a habit at the end of the lockdown, start it now. So in other words, if suddenly you're going to a lot of emotion-based foods and you think, well, it's on the lockdown. No, you're going to be like the drug addict who has to go through 2 weeks of horrible withdrawal symptoms at the end of the lockdown, and you probably won't. And so you will have adopted a new habit that will be unbelievably difficult to break. The lockdown is the time to prepare your mind and body for what's coming next, which we have no idea. We don't know what life is going to be like post-pandemic. And so you want to be as smart as you can, as educated as you can, have as many skills as you can, and you want to be as healthy as possible. So between those two things, that should give people the leverage to say, I want to change. But then now comes the next bit of, okay, I want to change, but how?
Right. But how? But you made such a great point, because I've really been praying for herd immunity. I really have been just asking whatever forces there are in the universe to help us get healthy so that we can start to fight this and these numbers can start to decline. You are right. The only way to do that, not just to pray about it, but to actually do something that strengthens your immune system, so that it overreacts, but so that it's right on balance, so we can actually start to fight this. I mean, thank God, the cases far outweigh the people who have passed. So there is an immune system out there. I'm just looking at it as humanity, but humanity needs a stronger immune system. If we stop believing the lies that the food system are telling us, this would definitely impact them. This is something we can do this second. So that's perspective shift for you. You can wear your mask and protect others, or you can eat right and protect others. That's a great perspective shift. So let's talk about the how.
The how often comes down to, first of all, getting a sense of education. And that is like, really, what are humans supposed to be eating? And that's a really easy thing that's a long since scientifically resolved issue. The only reason it's still open for debate is that there's profit in keeping the debate going. Like there's profit in arguing about whether this is good or that's bad and this is good and that bad, because what it does is it creates cognitive dissonance, and then people can't decide for themselves. And as soon as they can't decide for themselves, they'll take the easiest choice, and the easiest choice is generally something bad for them, the convenient choice. So the first thing is for people to take a personal responsibility in their education to really learn something about human nutrition. Now, that sounds kind of boring for a lot of people, but I'm just going to say this. If you're overweight, if you're unhealthy, if you've got hypertension, if you're on medications, if your thyroid isn't operating, if you're dealing with any of those things, I really want to be clear. It's not your fault. It's absolutely not your fault. I don't care what people said under their breath. I don't care. You got on the plane, you're a little overweight, and the person like, oh, I hope you don't sit beside me. Listen, it's not your fault. Never was it your fault. It was the fault of a disastrous food production system and a bought and paid for governmental regulation system. But it is your responsibility to do something about it. And that's the key here. So it's not your fault up to now. Please don't beat yourself up. Don't feel guilty. Don't have regret. But now it's your responsibility, and nobody will take the kind of care of your health that you will. Nobody will. No healthcare plan, no doctor, nobody will ever care for your health as much as you do. So it's up to you to learn something. Now, that's the first step.
I want to say thank you, by the way, for that, because to not take the blame and the shame and all of that contributes so much to the overeating and the emotional eating, the blame, that I've failed, I'm destined to be fat, shame, all of that. Thank you for taking that away from us. And I want everyone watching to just feel liberated, feel liberated for a moment. It isn't our fault. So how can we
really
take that
isn't.
responsibility? Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, deep breath.
Lisa, I've had like clients on our big like WildFit broadcasts, and I look at them and I know they're carrying weight they don't want to be carrying, and they have bad self-esteem about it. And I say those words to them, and they start crying. They start crying, deep, sobbing, crying that's releasing emotions of years piling up on them. And here's the thing that's really important to understand: the diet industry and the food industry benefit from that depression. They benefit from that self-loathing and that shame, because the more people feel that way, the less they can stick to any kind of eating program and the more junk they eat. And so it's a horrible, vicious circle. The first thing we have to understand is that the food industry, not because they're guilty of being evil people or anything like that, just because they have shareholders, they're profit-centric, and they're just doing the best they can to make profits for their shareholders. But at the end of the day, they have intentionally made food addictive. They've intentionally worked to get us to eat more than we need. And they've intentionally used marketing to anchor us to certain things, like now we can't get through this holiday without that snack food. They've done this with intention. And so it really isn't somebody's fault. It's their responsibility. So step one, learn a bit. Learn a bit about what people really need to eat. And as I said, this is resolved science. I went into this cave that my great-grandfather excavated. And you know, it's so funny. If you grew up in Canada like I did, you know, and you're in an old house, it might be 100 years old. You know, if you're in New York and you're in an old house, it might be 150 years old, right? And but if you move to California in an old house, it's like 18 years old. It's like, oh yeah, it's 18 years old, old. But if you go to London, it could be 300 years old. If you go to Croatia, it could be 800 years old, right? If you go to Egypt, it could be 3,000 years old. And that seems like a long time. Seems like a long time. These caves have been inhabited by sapiens for 200,000 years. That makes the pyramids yesterday evolutionarily. And so what's great about those caves is that they dug down into the cave floor and then put glass walls up so you can go down the steps and see exactly what humans have been eating for 200,000 years. It's not a mystery. It's right there. And you know what they were eating? They were eating a wide variety of seasonal plants. Yeah, because they, when people live in caves, they just throw the food over their shoulder and the cave floor rises and rises and nobody really notices it. And so what they did is then cut down 20 feet in, and that's 200,000 years of sediment buildup. So they can see exactly what they're eating. And then they put glass there so you can look at the layers. Like, for example, at one point, I can't remember how long ago now, but at one point, it was one of the last big glaciations about 10 or 12,000 years ago. The oceans receded by about 100 miles away from the coastline because all the polar, the glaciers suck the water out of the planet. Guess what they're not eating during that time? Shellfish. You can see it. The shellfish, suddenly they went on the no seafood diet. It's like somebody wrote some bestseller and frightened them about shellfish. No, the oceans pulled away. But as long as there was oceans there, they were eating shellfish. They were eating seasonally available fruits and vegetables. They were eating a wide variety of animals. Eggs. It was absolutely clear what sapiens have been eating all that time. And that's our evolutionary legacy. That's who we are. And to the degree we can stick to that is the degree we'll have optimal health. To the degree we violate that, we're going to have consequences.
Fascinating. So when you really look to history, your answers are right there. It's not in the pineapple diet book. It's really back hundreds of thousands of years. And so we ate evolutionarily, if that's a word, according to evolution. And we ate what was available. We ate what was abundant. We ate what was needed. We didn't eat what was not available. And therefore, species evolved and species survived. At what point? So, I mean, I don't know how, if you can tell there was diabetes back then. I mean, there probably wasn't, because there wasn't
absolutely not.
overabundant.
And nature's incredibly unforgiving. If you were 20 pounds overweight, you just wouldn't survive. You wouldn't make it. You couldn't keep up with the rest of the hunters, or you'd get hunted. Like, nature's unbelievably. Can you imagine? Oh, look at that cheetah. That cheetah's 15 pounds overweight. It's dead. Like, nature doesn't put up with that at all. It only once we developed agriculture and the ability to store calories did we create the permissibility of being sick. And so the trouble we have now is that we have outdated instinct. It's something we call the evolution gap. The gap that's been opening up between our physical and psychological evolution and our pace of change in society. And so the wider that gap gets, the harder it is to be happy, healthy, and satisfied with our lives. And so now, for example, the reason we have a craving for sugar is because at one point, sugar was unbelievably rare in the form of fruit that ripened only for a few days, and you needed to be motivated. You need to go get it now because it was going to help you to fatten up for the winter. If you didn't get your share, you might not make it through the winter. And so we have a powerful driving craving for it, for the taste, and something that causes a sugar craving when you eat sugar to make sure you got enough of the fruit.
So our DNA didn't adapt over the 30 to 50,000 years?
That's a blink of an eye. It's a blink of an eye. Evolution is a very different time span for a species like ours. There's this concept called evolutionary velocity. And in order to calculate the evolutionary velocity of a species, you look at things like their lifespan, their breeding cycles. But one of the most important things you look at is the amount of selective pressure on them. So in other words, if you have one population that's really facing hard times and the other population isn't, these guys, the ones with the harder time, will face a higher level of evolutionary velocity because only the strongest of them are surviving. Whereas the other ones are having a wider number of people surviving. And so their evolutionary velocity is in effect slowed down by that. But let's put it in numbers terms. About 5 million years ago was the last time we weren't really officially in an ice age. We're actually in an ice age right now. People don't understand this because the popular science is wrong. The popular common person science isn't really discussing this in correct terms. An ice age is when the polar caps are frozen. And a non-ice age is when the polar caps are thawed. Now, inside an ice age, you have these periods of glaciation and interglacials. So the glaciation is when these long teeth of ice come ripping down into the northern hemisphere, and you have a mile of ice over a city of London, and that's a glaciation inside the ice age. And we think of those as ice ages. But then you have an interglacial where the ice pulls away. So we're currently in an interglacial period of the current ice age. And we're due for another glaciation, by the way. They happen about every 10,000 years. It's been 10,000 years, but it could be another 2,000 years or 20 years, who knows?
I've
But
heard
why
that we
this
are
is
in
interesting.
that. Yeah,
Sorry?
go ahead. I've heard that we are in this ice age, which is very
That's
different
right.
and new for me. But yeah, you can look it up.
And it's a different way than the mainstream media talks about it. They go, well, you know, in the last ice age. No. In the last glaciation of this ice age. It's just a distinction. Now, the last time, if I've got this correct, the last time there was a proper like non-ice age time was about 5 million years ago, where there was no ice on the polar caps. And when there's no ice on the polar caps, Africa is like jungle from Cape Town to Cairo, because all the water has been released from the ice, and Africa is the one continent that straddles the equator so well. And so it's just jungle from Cape Town to Cairo. The reason I bring this up is that around about that time, there were these rhinos living in the woods, and they, you know, living in the forests. And as the forests got smaller and smaller and smaller, they started shoving some of the rhinos, the weaker rhinos, out into the grasslands that were expanding and opening. And those weaker rhinos had to kind of try and eke out a living in the buffer between the grasslands and the jungles. And many of them died because they can't eat grass, but some of them started eating grass and they got sick from it. But then some of them started evolving slightly better teeth and slightly different digestive systems. And over 5 million years, we got the white rhino. We got the white rhino out of that deal. It took 5 million years. So 30,000 years. And by the way, that same event is likely what caused us, because the weakest of the forest dwelling chimpanzee predators, very close to chimpanzees, the weakest of them were pushed out of the jungle, and they were forced to live this horrible existence on the edge of the grasslands while some of the cats were developing out there. And so soon they had to learn to stand up tall and look above the grass, because otherwise they could get hunted by the savanna cats. And so they eked out an existence on the edge of the savanna, learning to stand up tall, and they gave birth to sapiens. 5 million years that took.
That makes, you know, we have this. This is so interesting that we have to continue this show. And I really love this information. We haven't even gotten to the food piece, but it is a 30-minute show. So I'm going to actually say, I'm going to have you tune in tomorrow to continue to watch Eric Edmeades from WildFit talk more about our food evolution and what we should and could be eating right now out of our healthiest choices, and how to make those healthiest choices be a part of our subconscious. Well, we're going to wrap for now. I am Lisa Garr. You are watching the Aware Health series. Thank you so much, Eric. We'll talk with you tomorrow.